Yeah, get handsy with it.
All right. Well,
Get handsy with it. Okay.
Mic check. I'm good.
Yeah, you sound.
Okay.
I mean, you always sound great.
Wow.
You have that.
The voice of an angel.
I think
Okay.
Kelly's like, bam.
Hello.
How right in the kisser. Welcome back to the Bet on Her podcast. We have our first guest here today, Kahlee York. She's a professional beach volleyball player and the founder of Flow to Grow. Really excited about this conversation. I was texting Gina and I was like, I think we need to get somebody on that is all about health and wellness. And so for ourselves here in the room, unfortunately, Kelly's not here today. UCLA, Bruin stuff, blah, blah, blah. boring.
Right.
But we miss you, Kelly. But we were talking about it and we're excited to have you on. And for our listeners, this is going to be a great conversation about your health and wellness journey and New Year's resolutions, right? Everybody has them. So welcome, Kahlee.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
I love everything you guys are doing here. So
Oh.
it's an honor to be on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're happy to have you here because I think it was smart of you to suggest that because it is very apropos to have something in regards to everyone's got resolutions this year,
Right.
you know, at the start of a new year. And I think that one resolution that all women need to put at the forefront is their health.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give it away, but I'd love you to kind of give a little bit more of a background as far as what Flow to Grow is. And then going into next is kind of like how you even got inspired to do that and what was the why you wanted to start Flow to Grow.
Yeah. So Flow to Grow is something me and my mom started, and it's all about educating women and giving women language to their bodies and to hormones, and understanding how we're different, and also giving like more tangible, actionable steps to implement hormone health into their lives. And then another part of it, for me specifically, is working with younger athletes and really teaching them that athletics is so much more than just being good at your sport. And understanding how your body works is a huge part of being a top athlete and getting and performing your best. So I kind of started it because I've always been like really obsessed about like optimizing your body. And I think a large part of that as an athlete specifically is like understanding how your body works. So as a female, that's understanding like your reproductive system and your hormones and that sort of thing. So when I was in college, I had pretty irregular periods. And I was pretty frustrated with it because I was kind of told that that's just normal. You're an athlete. Like, that's just how things are going to go. And I was like, no, there's no way. Like, I just don't think this is right. And so I kind of started to dive into why that might be. And I remember my mom sent me a podcast actually about hormones. And I remember I was walking on campus trying to listen to it. And it was like, follicular this, ovulation that, like luteal this, and then and within a span of a minute I heard like 6 words I didn't understand that were used in a very casual sense, and I was like I was like, I'm done. And I remember like turning the podcast off like 5 minutes into it, and I was just like, no, I'm done with this. And I kind of left it alone, which is funny because I've come back around to it obviously. But I think that's a big thing that I'm trying to do, is just create language for it and make it easier to access and easier to understand. Because I think that's something that we don't have right now. It's very complicated. It feels very overwhelming. There's a lot of jargon we don't understand. The information is kind of hard to find. So that's kind of what Flow to Grow is trying to do.
Yeah. No, it's great. And just to share with everyone too, is Kahlee's actually helped me a lot right now because I recently went off birth control for the first time in 14 years. And yeah, I know I'm on my 3rd month, and so far so good. But anyway, it was just so cool because I feel like what you taught me, because I asked you for help because I was like, okay, there's going to be obviously some weird stuff that's going on with my hormones when I go off of this pill, and I want to make the transition as easy as possible for me. And everything I've learned from you and everything that you've inspired me to read up on, I've learned more about my health and my menstrual cycle as a woman in these past 2 months than I have my entire life.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy.
So crazy. It's like, I just feel like that's such a detriment to women in general, is like the lack of understanding. Like, so many women have no idea that it's more than just like your period. And it's like, that's so insane. Like, what's happening to our bodies over a month's time has everything to do with our cycle. It's not just those like 3 to 7 days you have your period.
For sure. I saw this one fact too that was just blew my mind about women have a 28-day cycle of hormones. And you know, Dana, guess how much a man's hormone cycle is? How long it is?
I don't know, 5.
24 hours.
That's it?
That's it.
Oh my God.
So
Okay.
they go through all of it in one day and we go through it spread out
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
28 days. Was just blew my mind.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's so cool because I think it's, especially for women in athletics, right? Like we're pushing our bodies in this whole different way. And there's obviously, I want to ask you more about like the different stages of the cycle and when you should and shouldn't, but like how, but more importantly, like how significant is the menstrual cycle on athletic performance?
I think it's huge because the way your hormones interact with your body and the way your body's changes over time. So it influences your energy levels. It can influence your mood. It influences the way you interact with food. And it influences the way you interact with stress or exercise or that sort of thing. So all of these things really play a role in athletics. So understanding how that may be fluctuating, even if you don't make dramatic changes, just that understanding and the ability to have that education to rely on to be able to make adjustments when you need to, just to have, I think for me, the biggest thing was giving myself some grace at times. Because it was like, oh, I don't have low energy just because like I'm sucking right now, you know, or like this weight doesn't feel hard just because I'm weaker. It's like, oh, like I understand that I'm in this certain phase in my cycle, so that might be something I'm susceptible to. So just having that understanding, I think, is such a huge part of athletics.
I wish I had that throughout my career. I'm probably much older than you, but in my old age, like you like to say,
Old age.
Golden years.
yeah, I wish I had somebody tell me to go and then look into your individual hormones, because when maybe hopefully not too much information, but like, you know, I suffered with irregular periods for a really long time, and they were like, oh, doctors were like, oh, it's just stress. It's just stress. You're going through these really tough times in your life and career changes and so on and so forth. And I was like, yeah, but I'm like having like night sweats.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is going on? And yeah, I don't know whether or not to share this, but I feel like a lot of the conversation is like taboo. And I just wish I knew back then what I know now, because I would have understood that at my old age, at 35, I'm going through perimenopause. Like that's insane to me.
Right.
That usually that doesn't happen, is what I'm told. It usually doesn't happen until like you're maybe 40 years old, but it does occasionally happen to those that are 35.
Right.
And it wasn't until I continued to sort of seek answers on my own, because I went from doctor to doctor, and they just were like, thyroids look fine. Everything looks great, Dana. It's just stress. And as it turns out, I had no estrogen anymore, and I can't have kids, and I wish I knew earlier.
Right.
And I had to mourn a part of me as a result of that. And like, I just trusted these individuals, and now as soon as I found out, I got all this blood work done and all these tests done, and I was like, why, you know, trying to figure out like what's going on with these night sweats. Why am I so irrational and lashing out at everybody and feeling kind of like I'm going crazy?
Yeah.
And brain fog and all these things. And all along it was my hormones.
Yeah.
And so I called up all my girlfriends and I go get your hormones checked, please. And you really have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
You have to, if something's wrong, go seek those answers. Don't accept these, like, you know, these tests that are given to you just as a basic sort of
protocol.
Yeah.
Right.
And like I wish that I had this conversation that we're about to have earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was like growing up, I was a gymnast and I played soccer, and a lot of the gymnasts were like, oh, I don't get my period.
Yeah, like normal.
That's normal. My
Yeah.
doctor said it's normal. I'm totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they did get their period out, you know, at their collegiate careers, they were like, this is not normal
Right.
for me. That's what they would say. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. Maybe it's not normal for me to have my period
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's skewed and taboo, and sort of feel embarrassed talking about this. But I feel like if I don't talk about this, if you guys don't talk about this, no one's gonna know, and no one ever discusses it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a little tidbit about myself. Maybe I'm oversharing, but
not
I
at all.
not at
Thank
all.
you
But
for being vulnerable.
yeah, it's hard for me to talk about, but that was the first thing I did. Was I called my friends and my family members, and I was like, I literally cried. I was like, I can't have children anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that decision was, I just found out too late,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
of course.
I can relate to like not feeling like I'm getting the answers from the people that I should trust to have those answers from. And I think that's something that really angers me about this, specifically is like women don't really talk about hormones until they get or they're in menopause.
Yeah, it's too late.
And that's too late, right? And it's like we experience all these like PMS symptoms and all these things, and it's just like, or we don't have our periods, or they're irregular, or they're super heavy, and it's like, oh, she's just like going through her period. It's just like, that's just like such an easy phrase for people to say. And it's like, oh, you're just experiencing that, like, oh, like it's okay, like that's just normal. And it's like, these things are not normal. Like our bodies hurting and suffering on a consistent basis is not normal. And I just think it's ridiculous to think so. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, is getting this information to girls at a younger age. So then it's like, okay, well, maybe if we start talking about this when the girls are teenagers, when they're younger, and they start making adjustments now, and they start making educational decisions now, maybe menopause isn't going to be as horrible as it's been for the generations above us, right? And
It's
like,
horrible, you guys.
yeah, it's crazy.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no education is there. And it's just like, oh, women are suffering. Okay, cool. Like, sorry guys.
Oh, it's just your period. She's acting out.
Yeah.
She's on her period.
Yeah.
She's really excited. She's not on her period. You know, like it's crazy.
Like if a guy ever says like, "Oh, are you PMSing?"
oh my gosh.
Murder. Murder.
You can dead.
Don't know what I'm going through.
But yeah, I think it's like, it's crazy because my story too was, I was put on birth control in the first place when I was in college. I had something very traumatic happen to me in college, and I ended up losing a lot of weight. And I went to my gyno, and instead of my gyno being like, we should look at your, like how much weight you've lost, and maybe that's a factor, or we should think about like, maybe you should talk to a therapist, all this stuff. She just was like, let's just go on birth control and it'll regulate your period.
Yeah.
And that was the fix for me. And I was on it literally since then until 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And it just sucks because I'm not discrediting birth control, right? It works for
Absolutely.
people. It's a great contraception. And I found one that didn't give me a lot of side effects. But then I was starting to think about like, you know, I'm 34 and I am not ready for kids. But I think I want one day. And so I just was starting to like get my life in order as far as planning for that, so that I have the option maybe one day. And, you know, like your story, obviously I feel for you, and I don't want to have that, you know, I can't imagine what that felt like, or what that feels like. So I'm trying to take those steps, and that's, you know, and it's been so great to connect with you about all this. But I think, you know, I'm not saying don't take birth control. I'm just saying really find out and talk to more people and talk to professionals that you trust and that have, you know, like someone like Kahlee who can give you more insight into like, maybe I should have thought about my diet and my nutrition and a therapist first before I should have even gone on birth control.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
taking those steps first I think is key.
Yeah. And I think a big thing too I want to stress is like work with a practitioner who thinks about this. And to kind of jump on your story too, I was actually talking with a friend this past weekend. And again, I want to emphasize I'm not for or against birth control. I think everything has its place. I just want to make sure women are making their educational decisions. And my friend was put on birth control when she was early high school, I believe, for migraines. And so she had gone in, she had frequent migraines, and they were like, oh, like, you're just like, hormones are coming up. Like, let's just put you on like birth control and that will like take care of things. Right. And so she ended up talking to one of her friends, and she was describing later in life, her migraines and like what was actually happening when she was having her migraines. And she was, I think it was called like, she was like, oh, I think you have like ocular, I forget exactly what the words were, but, she was like, oh, like I take this medication for, like, it had nothing to do with my hormones. And so my friend went into her doctor and talked to her about it, and like, oh yeah, that is what it is. And so then she started taking medication for a whole different thing that had nothing to do with her hormones. And I think that's what's really scary is like you have these symptoms, and they're expecting it to be like controlled, and it's birth control doesn't like fix these symptoms. That's what I want people to understand. What it does is it suppresses them, puts a Band-Aid on them so you don't experience them, but they're still there. Whatever the root cause is for those things are still there. And so it can be dangerous for women, because if that root cause is still there, that means it's still impacting your body in some way, even though you're not feeling those symptoms. And so if you're going to go on birth control for migraines, for all these things, I just really want to encourage you to work with a practitioner that is going to ask you more about that and not just immediately put you on birth control for it.
Yeah, I think that's really good information, and all of us, for being a little vulnerable here. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. I want to get into kind of like a little bit of a Cliff Notes, right, version, because obviously we want to like promote your services and all of that, but I would love to kind of get just an abbreviated version of maybe like let's first go over like the cycles or the cycle stages, right? Because obviously you said those words earlier and I just learned them too. And for some people it might have sounded like a foreign language.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, let's first go over kind of what each stage is,
Right.
and maybe kind of a general definition of it.
So before I kind of dive into it, I will preference that one of the confusing things about, and a lot of people dive into cycle syncing, and that's not necessarily what I teach. But people talk about it in different ways. So people do put different things in different phases, which is another confusing part of this. But the way I see it and the way I've learned it, your cycle starts when your period starts, which lasts probably about like 3 to 7 days. Then phase 2 is your follicular phase, that wonderful word that no one remembers. And that's
Follicular.
phase 2. Follicular.
Not even gonna try it.
I was convinced I was saying it wrong for forever.
Phelan.
I hate you so much. I'm literally gonna chuck this iPad. I keep ruining her name, and I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna do it.
Not gonna do it.
I'm not gonna embarrass myself again.
Some words are just hard. Words are hard.
Words are hard.
Sorry to embarrass you.
That's okay. That's okay. You could pick on me. That's fine.
Anyways, phase 2 is the follicular phase.
Yep.
And that's the time between the end of your period and ovulation. So this time period can change based on stress. So typically if your period is shorter or longer, it's because of this phase. Phase 3 is ovulation. So this is 24 to 48 hours. So this is when we're actually fertile and we can actually get pregnant. And then the last phase, phase 4, is the luteal phase. So this phase is close to 14 days. And this is kind of when we're more susceptible to PMS. And so we're going to feel things a little bit, you're going to feel a little slower, a little less energetic, that sort of thing. So those are the 4 phases.
14 days.
14
Men,
days.
did you hear that?
Yeah.
Did you get that part?
Yeah.
Include the period.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now we've got the 4 stages. What about any, like for female athletes specifically, how can you, during those stages, let's go through this first, is how can they adjust their training schedules to maximize performance?
Right.
Based on the stage of the cycle they're in.
Right. So I think if you are in control of your schedule, there are ways. I think a lot of female athletes, athletes in general, don't really have much control, considering their coaches, they're in college programs or strength programs or whatever. So I think for me, it's less about adjusting my schedule and more about what's my mindset in my schedule, and how do I handle cool downs and warm-ups. So during your menstrual phase, during your period, your hormones are super low, and so your energy is low. So typically your hormones and your energy levels are coincide with each other. So during phase 1, your energy is going to be really low, but you can actually get a lot out of working out. And as I've started cycle syncing, or whatever you want to call it, paying attention to my hormones, I've actually found that I actually really enjoy like a good strength training during my menstrual phase. But the mindset there is kind of just to get in the gym. Like you just kind of got to do it, take your time, go through it, like, and your energy is going to be low. That's okay. And then phase 2, follicular. So the hormones are starting to rise now. So your energy is starting to rise as well. So this can be a really great time to kind of increase the intensity. So in the gym, just like really trying to get after it and use that increasing natural energy as it's coming up. Ovulation, same thing. The energy is kind of peaking. Your hormones are peaking. So this is a really great time for like maxes. If you want to do like double days, like that sort of thing. So you can expect your energy to be super high, feeling super motivated, super confident. And then in your luteal phase, your energy is now dipping again. So your hormones are going back down as you enter your period, your menstrual phase. So this can be a really great time to listen to your body. And if I take time off, it's typically during this time. I don't try to push my body too hard, which can feel not so great as an athlete. Like you feel like you're failing almost. I feel like you're taking time off, or you're skipping that workout or this and that. And what I found when I started tracking, when I started paying attention, was I was actually way more prone to injuries during my luteal phase because your recovery is actually not as great. So what I prioritize if I'm getting in the gym, if I'm getting in the sand, if I'm doing double days, is I really prioritize a longer workout or warm up, and a longer cool down. So I just make sure I'm prioritizing that time between and being super intentional with my form, because I am a little bit more prone to injury during that phase, and your energy is super low as well. So that's kind of how it fluctuates and kind of how I think about it as I go through it, which can be really helpful because I feel like if you go from ovulation to luteal, it's like, oh, I'm feeling great this week. And then the next week you're doing the same weights and you're like, oh my God, what's happening right now?
So heavy.
It's so heavy.
Yeah.
When I would do, when I did have my period and I was doing my runs during ovulation, oh my God, you guys, I was doing like
Usain Bolt.
I felt like a superwoman.
Take over the world.
I was doing like probably 8 to 10 miles. Mm-hmm. Just running straight, and I'm like, I feel great. Like, look at me go. I'm prancing around. Like, oh my God. And then the next week, I was like, dead.
I can't do it.
I was like, I overdid it, and I just never understood why.
Yeah.
Right.
I like the thing you said though about mindset too, because you're right. A lot of times with athletics, you can't control what you're training. Like, I can't take a week out of the same. I mean, I could, but it would definitely be detrimental sometimes, especially if I'm trying to create some chemistry and practice with my partner. But I like having that idea of like having a different mindset. Like, okay, I might not feel my best today, but I'm going to push through and take a second if I need an extra breath or whatever that is. So I think that's a good note for a lot of younger athletes too, to not overdo it.
Yeah. And also not being super hard on yourself, because I'm going to tell this story. I don't know if I should be telling this story. But I don't know the exact science, so I'm going to quote me on this. But I remember I was talking to one of my friends and we were playing one day and she could not pass worth anything. Like could not, right? And the very next week...
Who's your friend?
We're going to call her out. But it's okay. I'm about to call myself out. So the very next week I show up to practice and like the opposite happens to me. I'm like, I don't know where the ball is in space. I don't know where my body is. I don't know what's happening. I was like, am I an athlete? Like, I'm not really sure. And it was funny. I started talking to her after the practice, and at that time I was in my luteal phase, and she was like, yeah, I just like started my period. So during that practice the previous week, she was actually in her luteal phase. And it's funny because your spatial awareness just isn't so strong. And so your muscle activation, because you're more prone to dehydration during your luteal phase, is actually down, which electrolytes, hydration helps your muscles activate. Plus on top of it, you're super low energy. So moving your feet through the sand is not as easy as normal.
So interesting.
So easy. So there's all these factors that can play into your performance, maybe not feeling as great. So I think for me, really being able to take a step back and just like, okay, that's what happened. Like I got out on the sand, I got some touches, like that's fine. Next week will be better.
Yeah. And just like, you're like, I exercise, so the endorphins are probably helpful too.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
I think we were talking about this after you told me that story before was I wanted to go back and figure out when I was in my luteal or menstrual phase of my cycle and base it off my tournament results.
Oh,
so like go back
That'd
and
be
be like,
interesting.
I think I won Atlanta when it was like 2 weeks before my period. So I was right around the follicular/ovulation,
Yeah.
you know? And I want to look
That's-
back and be like, okay, does this make sense? Or, you know,
so
did I just
interesting.
bypass
Wait,
all this?
that would be really interesting
Yeah,
to see. I mean,
right.
can you imagine all of the players doing that?
I know.
Unbeatable.
Wild.
Yeah.
The best competition, the best matches.
Or we just all spend a lot of time together and all get on the same
Yeah.
cycle and then make the AVP schedule all tournaments when we're at our best, so we know we're all giving our best at any point in time. Could you imagine?
Can you imagine?
Oops.
Oh,
It's okay. I just want to say, like, we women go through so much, and they're expected to be at the same level or even better than the men. We are already better than the men because we have to deal with all of this.
absolutely.
Like that, no one ever thinks about that. Like, I think I saw a comment, something about Caitlin Clark from Iowa, and like,
Stud.
oh yeah, she's still not as good as Steph Curry, and it's like, dude,
It's like, oh my gosh.
are you serious?
Yeah.
You know, like she's killing it. Number one, Caitlin Clark, we'd like to have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are amazing.
But like, add the fact that we have to go through that hormonally for how many days? It's like, would you say it's
28 days,
28
yeah.
days.
On average.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most women are going through it without realizing that they're going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing. Like these poor women, like I feel like it's just like persevere. And it's like you get stuck in that in athletics in general. You know, it's like always go, and like never take a step back. And I think that's something that our hormones and our cycle teaches us really well, is this like natural fluctuation of intensity and rest. And like between those phases, I think I've told you this before, but I really love thinking of it as like, okay, like phase 1 is rest, building that foundation. Phase 2 is like planning, prepping, like energy's like higher, so I'm gonna get ready to do things. Phase 3 is execution. It's time to be confident, get after it. And then phase 4 is like review, like how did those things go? Let me get ready for the next phase and that sort of thing. So I think it teaches this like beautiful like building of
Being our best selves.
being our best selves. I just think it builds really beautifully and something that we can all apply to athletics, because I think it's something that athletes, female or not, need to learn how to do. It's like we need to learn how to rest, we need to learn how to plan, we need to learn when to get after it and then when to review and like reflect on what we're doing. And so that's something that I think it teaches really well, that everyone can really pay attention to that.
And are there many women or athletes that come to you and they're like, hey, I'm not feeling so hot, so I decided to go for like an energy drink, and I'm, this is the way I'm going to get my energy back.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's get into nutrition. Right?
Let's do it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm really glad you brought up the energy drink. So that is huge I think among everyone, but among young athletes a lot. And I think you see it, a lot of them using that as breakfast. And
oh gosh.
yeah, it's like, what
Down
do you have for
C4?
breakfast this morning? Yeah. I was talking to one of my friends, he's a trainer in Florida, and he's like, I asked these girls like what they had for breakfast this morning, what they had before like they came to lift and like do things, and they're like, oh yeah, I had a Celsius. I'm like, no.
Oh my
No.
And it's like, oh my goodness. So for everyone listening, let's see, how do I want to go about explaining this? So, so caffeine in general increases your stress response. Okay. So when you're stressed, when you have a stress response, you produce the hormone cortisol. Okay. So cortisol greatly interferes with our other hormones because our body, when it's in a stress response, thinks it needs to survive. Okay. So the way evolution has happened, we're supposed to have a stress response and like a relax response. And when we're stressed, it's like to help us survive, but we're meant to transition out of that. But when we need to survive, we shut off things in our body that we don't need to survive in that moment. So when we produce cortisol and we're in those stress response, we actually shut down our digestive system and our reproductive system. So those systems are not fluctuating the way they need to because our body thinks it needs to prioritize cortisol and prioritize our stress response in order to survive. So when you're constantly producing cortisol from caffeine, from super high intense activity constantly, from emotional stress, all these things, you're in this chronic stress state. So your body isn't able to have correct digestive health, have correct reproductive health. And we see that a lot, especially with women with like IBS. You see a lot of bloating, digestive health right now, irregular periods. A lot of that is coming from this chronic stress state. And so things like caffeine without food increases that cortisol response and that stress response.
So I did that this morning. I had coffee.
Most of us do.
Scheiße. Dang it. But how do we go about educating? You said you have a friend that's in Florida and he's, teaching his girls and talking to his girls. But like, how do we go about educating male coaches about this as well? Because I think that's also really significant in the way that their team performs, their female athletes and athletes in general.
Yeah, I think it's really like, it's such a hard thing because obviously male athletes, it doesn't directly impact them. But I just want to encourage like all men out there, like to really invest in learning about this too, because it infects your daughters, your wives, your friends, like your athletes, if you're coaches, and to just really understand what they're going through on a constant basis, to have that respect for it. But in general, I think male coaches, like taking that personal responsibility to really learn about this and to really understand that this is impacting your athletes. This is impacting their performance, and you care about their nutrition, about their training, about their lifts. You're caring about all these other things that are impacting their performance. This is just another aspect to that. It doesn't have to be this like super uncomfortable taboo topic. And I think male coaches tend to avoid it because it's super uncomfortable to talk about. And I think it's just about having those conversations more regularly and having this be more a familiar thing to be talking about. So those male coaches can kind of step into that role. And I don't think it needs to be this uncomfortable thing. I think the more you do it, the more regular it is and the more comfortable it will be for your girls to hear it from you as well.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And I think too, going back to kind of like the nutrition aspect, you said it doesn't necessarily mean like don't have caffeine, but like eat something with it.
Right.
And so then I guess like an add-on is, so a little bit of another Cliff Notes thing is kind of based off of the stage of your cycle you're in, nutrition wise, what should you be really focusing on putting back in your body?
Right. So each phase, your body needs different nutrients and different food focuses. I don't want to harp too much on this because I think in general, if you just eat a very balanced diet, I think that will do wonders for you. But if you are having issues, if you are experiencing things, some things you can focus on. So in phase 1, so in the menstrual phase, a huge thing is going to be blood sugar balance. Because a lot's going on in our bodies. So blood sugar balance really means eating a balanced meal. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, make sure you're eating enough and make sure you're eating protein, carbs, and fats in each of your meals. In your follicular phase, so this is kind of when our body is building. So like the hormones are rising, our body's building, preparing for potential pregnancy. So it's really important to increase diversity in your diet. So just making sure you're getting different colors. You're actually able to access more carbs. So this is a great time to eat some carbs when you're exercising. But just really eating the rainbow is kind of the focus for the follicular phase. And then ovulation, the biggest thing is to eat fiber. So without using too much jargon, basically, if we have too much of one hormone in our body, we experience imbalances, and that's kind of what leads to PMS symptoms. So fiber helps our body get rid of excess hormones. So during ovulation, as we're transitioning from a really high hormone state to a really low hormone state, it's really helpful to eat fiber to be able to get rid of that excess and detox your body of the hormones that you don't need. And then the last phase, the luteal phase. So my focus here is your metabolism actually ramps up. So you get more hungry, and a lot of people experience more cravings. So actually being okay, including an extra snack during that time. Blood sugar is also really important here. It's like high fiber carbs. Just making sure really, I think that you're eating enough during that phase because you do have a higher calorie need. So I think that's, and hydration during the luteal phase. That's something that changed my life when I started focus on that.
And not just water.
And not just water,
Right,
electrolytes.
yeah.
Yeah. So I do drink electrolytes during that phase mainly.
I think a question that might come up with all this information for someone might be, how do I know what stage I'm in?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, obviously, you know, when you're on your period, but like ovulation, you said is anywhere from 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
So like are there any tools or methods that females can use to track their performance or cycles?
Right. So my biggest suggestion is to find an app that you like. I think would use Modern Fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I use Moody Monthly, which I love, but you do have to pay a subscription. But there's a lot of apps out there. And I think if you're just getting started, really just tracking when you have your period, just start there. That's super simple. And then there's a lot of apps that will start to help you track ovulation. But ovulation is, and I think that's one of the hard things. It's a really hard thing to track. So I know like the Oura Ring, the Whoop, I'm about to try the Evie Ring. There's some devices out there that help track your basal temperature, which is what helps you track ovulation. So using one of those tools, you can use a thermometer, but that's a very hard thing to use as well to be consistent with. But I think just starting with an app and starting to track when your period ends or starts when it ends is a really great place to start. And then if you're really trying to use it to track your ovulation, I think just diving into some other apps that kind of focus a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I started using this app called Modern Fertility, and because I was learning, most women use it to figure out when they should have sex to get pregnant. And I was like, when should I
should not
be having sex?
Avoid.
Yeah, avoid. Do not get near. Yeah. And it's been cool. Well, you basically like pee in a cup and you put the strip in the cup and then it tells you your LH level or something. And so you have like your surge, right? Is like your surge happens and you typically ovulate within 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
And right when I got off birth control, I used the app for a month and I had like this big surge and I was like, whoa. And then month 2, I had like surge. And I was like, what is happening? And I was talking to you. I was like, I have no clue. And then I Googled it. And there's this thing called, when you get off birth control, this thing called the twin effect. And it's basically like your eggs are like, we're free.
You're going to have twins. Congratulations.
Yeah. But like, I basically, anyway, so.
That's it. That's fascinating.
It was crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
But I think, so it is a myth that every woman ovulates on the 14th day. And I will say, if you are starting to use apps, most apps will calculate it as your 14th day. So just make sure that if you're using it to track your ovulation, that you do the research behind the app that you're using, and make sure that they are not just doing the standard 14-day ovulation period.
It's good to know.
Yeah. All of this is so insightful. Oh my
know.
God. I wish I knew about this earlier.
Yeah. It's just crazy that we're this old and at no point were we educated about this, even when we were in college or like health class in high school.
Yeah.
No way. But you know, it's so important.
It's so important. And like, I know I still have so many conversations with women my age, and it's like, the information is hard to find, and when you find it, it's hard to understand. And so I think that's something that I'm just really trying to do, is really just bring that education, have access to it, and just a simpler way to understand it and apply it.
Yeah. And everyone's so different too.
Right.
So have you faced any challenges or resistance in like promoting this aspect?
I think a lot of people just feel very overwhelmed with it, because there is a lot of jargon and understanding. And I find that a lot of people come to me asking about cycle syncing. And what I think about cycle syncing is I think a lot of people just think of it as like these rules. It's like, oh, during this phase, I can only eat this. During this phase, I can only do this. I can only exercise this way. And I really want to encourage women not to necessarily follow that strict of guidelines. I think what I love about cycle syncing is it's really just teaching women to be aware of their bodies, and then teaching that natural fluctuation. But besides that, I think just getting it to not be so taboo.
Yeah.
And just getting people a little bit more comfortable with it. Because even like talking to parents and talking to girls, it's like you say the word period, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. You like hide your
Cooties.
you hide your tampon in your hand as
Yeah.
you're going to the bathroom.
I know.
I'm like, it's here.
It's like,
Plus-
yeah.
That's so funny.
I'm feeling great.
I don't know if I'm gonna like add this to the podcast, to the recording, the publishing, but I wanted to add something really, really funny. I was on social media and there was this woman that was going around asking a bunch of guys like, "Oh, how does a woman pee when she's on her period?"
I love those videos.
Have you seen
They're
that?
so funny.
Gosh.
Yeah, and the guy's like, "Well, I mean, you have to take it out before you pee, right?"
Yeah.
And
Like how many tampons does a girl go through in a day? 14? Every time she
Yeah.
has to go pee?
like,
there's
how do you not know?
I
There's
know.
no education.
Yeah.
Well, you know what's really sad about that is, well, actually, there's so many things over my time too that I'm like, how did I not know that earlier? But the pressure is put on our moms, and I think that's like such a horrible thing. Like, why is this such important information? You're just expected to learn from your mom, who's expected to learn from their mom, who was probably never taught any of this to begin with. It's like, oh, you're just supposed to like learn it within the family because we're too uncomfortable to talk about it in health class.
My family comes from, I'm Romanian, and my family's Romanian, and my parents grew up on the countryside, and so she never talked to me about it. Actually, it was my older sister that talked to me about my first period when I first got it on vacation in Florida. And I think I was like 14 years old. And like, I'm like, okay, I was freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I was like, am I dying? Like, I didn't know what was happening. And my only option at the time was a tampon.
Oh.
And
That was your first experience?
my very first time. And I was screaming because it was excruciating.
Yeah.
At 14 years old, I'm putting this foreign object in my body, and it wasn't even the plastic; it was cardboard.
Oh no.
So, like, can
Men
you
will never
imagine?
understand this.
No, like, can you imagine, like, just growing up and not being told about any of these things and figuring it out on your own, and how scary it is, and how frustrating it is, and not understanding your body, not understanding your mood swings, not understanding anything except for your hormones. Your thyroid levels are fine and it's just PMS. This is normal.
Right.
Let's put you on birth control. And yeah, like here are the side effects of birth control, but birth control will just put it's just a Band-Aid and it'll fix everything.
Yeah.
And that is so infuriating because, like, again, I wish I knew when I was younger.
Yeah.
But now we have this podcast and now we get to share these amazing things. Yeah.
I know. And I don't want to ask you too much because I want people to be able to use your services.
Yeah.
So like, I would love to for you to share kind of how people can go about working with you.
Yeah.
If they want to, because I know, like, obviously, like I said, everyone's different. So everybody's got their own story of how their bodies function and would need help.
Right. Yeah, so you can find us at flowtogrow.net and schedule a consultation call. And then if you're also just looking for easy information here and there, I'm also on Instagram at finding_flowtogrow, where I'll just post easy tips, recipes that I do, kind of general information there as well. So that's how you can reach me.
One thing that comes to mind is Alex Kleinman and how she talked about during her run with April for the Olympics and gold medal and all that stuff. She also had a coach for her health and hormones.
Yeah, she literally had
someone
work with her
coaching
the whole
her.
2 years of
It's
her
amazing.
Olympic run.
That's so amazing.
Except she
obviously it
found
worked out for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she found that person though. Like I think she mentioned it was overseas though, right?
I don't remember
I have to go
exactly.
back and look, but
but it was pretty cool. And so that's just one obviously example of how working with somebody, especially if you're a female athlete, how much this can benefit you.
You can get a
in
gold
maximizing
medal.
your performance. You could win a gold medal if you work with Kahlee.
Exactly. That's my new slogan, I think.
Yeah, but like it's interesting because it's not just like these higher performing athletes that deserve to get this sort of information.
Right.
You know, like it's
All ages of women.
yes.
Young, juniors, women going through menopause, women post-menopause, all of that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So important.
It's so important. And I think there's like a little bit for everyone. It's like whether you're on birth control, whether menopause, whether you're young and menstruating, like there's information for everyone. And I just really want to encourage everyone to just figure out how your body works. Because that's the best way to health. And, you know, starting off this new year and a lot of people want to be healthy. I really want to encourage, I think you did a really amazing job of this when you were diving into this, is just really being curious.
Thank you.
And it's not something that's just going to come super fast. And I think a lot of us want fast results, but understanding your body and being curious about the process will just go so far for you, whether you're an athlete or not.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that was great.
This was an amazing podcast. Kelly, you missed out. You're gonna have. She's usually there in the side taking notes.
man.
She's just really excited.
Yeah,
Anyway.
she's gonna have to listen to this and
Oh my
fill her
God.
notepad full.
Yeah, she's gonna write everything down.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last bit here that we're gonna end with is how do you take a bet on yourself, or how have you taken a bet on yourself?
I think for me is just learning to trust myself, especially with stuff like this. I feel like I've had people and professionals tell me that I'm wrong or that that's not right. And I think for me, taking ownership and just trusting that what I think and feel is right, and taking that and running with it.
Yeah, I love
That's
that.
great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the last piece here is if there's anything on your heart or mind that you want to share with us here in the room, and Murphy, he's
Asleep on the ground.
asleep on the ground, or with our listeners, the mic is yours.
I think my message is mainly to younger female athletes, or females in general, in that you're not less than because you're a female. I feel like we're taught that a lot. And we're taught that because we have to learn all these things about our hormone cycle that, you know, we're not as great as the guys. And I think that's BS. I think if we learn how to honor our bodies and we really educate ourselves, I can only imagine what we can accomplish and what we can do, because we're already doing it without this information, without understanding. We're going against all of the odds and we're accomplishing things. So I can only imagine that as this information becomes more accessible, and people learn more about it, what all we can accomplish and do together.
That's really well said. Let's snaps for that.
Yeah,
Let's
Jinx.
go. Punch buggy.
Oh my gosh. I loved this episode.
This was a great
Yes.
one. This was, it's so insightful. Thank you so much for your time. And I know that we booked you last minute. Thank you, Gina, for coordinating all of that. And
Glad to be available.
yeah, loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You guys are great.
thank you. And that
fun.
is the Bet on Her podcast.
I guess I have to do this for Kelly. And cut.
Ooh, good job.
Oh my gosh.
That was awesome.